It's 1963. You're 26 years old, and you've left school at 16 to work in a textile factory. On weekends, you sneak off to jump out of airplanes, perhaps as an escape from day-to-day life. Suddenly, out of 400 candidates, you're chosen to become the first woman in space. You're launched into orbit alone, riding in a spacecraft with settings that are so wrong that if you didn't catch the mistake, you would have drifted endlessly into the void. You fix it, you stay calm. You orbit the Earth 48 times. And when you land, you're told to smile for the cameras, because you're not just a cosmonaut anymore. You're a symbol, a political tool.
Intro! Do. Okay, so before we're going to get into our silenced woman of STEM for the day, we're going to have to talk about some history first, because there's a lot happening. So after World War II, there was the Cold War. The Cold War was basically political and military rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States. And for almost 50 years, the two superpowers competed for supremacy in a global struggle in various areas, from military power to consumer goods and a bunch of other different things. One of those things was space. Space was seen as a new frontier for competition. Each country tried to show off its superiority through rocketry and spaceflight, and it was basically giant space peacocking. And along with these milestones came technologies that could be used for other purposes. Rockets, missiles, satellites, bombs, spies. It was good, but it was also bad.
Yeah, so speaking of missiles, military applications for missiles spurred the development of early rocket technology. In the Cold War, the USSR and the US began building long-range rockets to use as weapons. However, the race towards building defenses soon turned into building rockets for space exploration. The same rocket that could carry a nuclear warhead could launch a spacecraft into orbit. The V-2 missile was one of the first types of technology that was reworked in order to serve as a rocket. So the V-2 rocket was a ballistic missile that was developed during World War II, which was between the years 1936 and 1942, if you didn't know that, by Nazi Germany, and it was the first human-made object that made it to space. They launched it in 1944. Fun fact, the V in its name stands for this big long German word that I can't pronounce, so bear with me, but Vergeltungswaffe? But in English that means vengeance?
Vengeance.
Vengeance weapon? So, there's that. So the V-2 was the most advanced rocket of its time. In 1944, probably because there were basically no other rockets.
I miss when science was like that. I miss when it was like, this may not be great, but it's the first thing to happen. Oh no. It's the first thing to happen, so it's automatically good. Like, I can't make a discovery and it automatically be good anymore.
No, this was the first rocket, and therefore it was an important breakthrough because it was the first of its kind. So, but it did use liquid fuel to increase its thrust capabilities, so I think they were able to make a prototype of a rocket, but it didn't go very far because they didn't have any liquid fueling.
I see.
So this was the first successful large-scale type, but yeah.
So technology eventually led to the creation of the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, ICBM. It was 5 times faster than sound and was independent of signals from the ground. Soviet rocket designer, oh my god.
Sergey.
Okay, so Eva took Russian. I did not take Russian. I don't know how to speak Russian. I went to Poland, but I still don't know how to speak any sort of Eastern European language.
Yeah.
Sergey Korolev, okay, headed the development of the R-7, which was the world's first ICBM. On October 4th, 1957, the USSR launched satellite Sputnik. Is it Sputnik or Sputnik?
I've always said Sputnik.
Okay, I have 2, but I didn't know if it was just
the American.
Yeah. But this is what started the space race. This made an impression that America was behind the Soviets in science and technology, and good old America. They cannot stand for being behind. And then this sentiment got even worse after America's Vanguard rocket exploded in December of 1957. I'm so sorry. There was nobody on the rocket, right?
No.
Okay, yeah.
It's just the rocket.
It exploded. America's first success in the space race, though, was a satellite, Explorer 1, in January of 1958. The early years of the space race were categorized through successful first, like the first satellite, the first living being in space, the first human to orbit Earth, etc.
So if you're tuning in today for your episode on YouTube, I'll put like a little timeline of some of the main events that occurred through the space race, if you're interested in like the bigger picture and like the details of everything. In November of 1957, the USSR launched Sputnik 2, which carried a dog into space, and being the first nation to send a living organism into orbit. So the dog's name was Laika, and it was the first living creature to orbit the Earth. So Laika was a stray wandering the streets of Moscow when she was captured and then prepared for her space mission.
That's so sad. Imagine you're just like a dog, like living your life, like catching rats and like, I don't know, like eating slop.
Now you go to space.
Why does this keep happening? I'm so sorry if our sound is bad. Our microphone / water bottle keeps migrating.
We've got like decent video production, but our microphone is like a clip-on.
If you want to sponsor us,
give us a mic, please. But yeah, imagine just like chilling as a dog wandering around.
And then they just capture you and put you in space.
Okay, you know like how some people like let their pets outside? Like I let my cat outside around. What if they thought he was a stray?
And then he just put your cat in space. Put in space.
I would cry. That would be the worst day of my life.
Put in space would make a fun TV show though.
Yeah, that is true. So Laika launched on a one-way trip and was said to have died painlessly in about a week after orbit.
How did they know it was painlessly?
So let's get into that.
Oh, okay.
So even though like this caused an outrage, like you're sending a dog into space and you know it's gonna die in space, it wasn't particularly insane because both the U.S. and the USSR were like so determined that they believed that sacrifices were necessary to advance in technology and advance in the space race.
Mm-hmm.
But Laika did not live as long as the Soviet officials led to the world to believe, and I feel like this needed to be included because it shows how the Soviets' attitude towards propaganda and making themselves look the best they possibly could was a constant theme. Propaganda is very big for the USSR. But it was revealed in 2002, which is an entire 45 years later, that Laika had died from overheating and panic just a few hours after the mission started.
A few hours?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Also, Laika was also like chained in the proper position so that it like going up to space wouldn't tussle her around too much, and then they got like food for her because they wanted her to live at least a couple days. Like that was the idea and the goal. So her food was like a Jello consistency, and she like the spaceship like immediately overheated. They were tracking her vitals and everything. She died like really stressed out pretty much immediately.
No, why would they do that?
Why didn't tell anyone that?
Why couldn't they send a cockroach into space? They could take vitals of a cockroach.
I don't know if they knew how to do that in like
or like a rat.
30s.
I feel like a rat has less consciousness than a dog.
I think that's why people were so mad that they sent a dog into space. I think the USSR was like, everybody loves dogs. They'll be like, oh my god, dog in space, so cool. But
no, rat in space.
Yeah, I mean USSR was the first people to do that, but like the United States, all nations really who have space technology have been sending like random animals.
Yeah, I know. I think the US sent a monkey, didn't they?
Yeah, they've sent a bunch of stuff. At some point in like the 2000s, I think the USSR or Russia at this time sent like 2 geckos into space. So
that's really random.
But the reason it was even like crazier. They wanted to observe if they could mate in space. And then they like died. So the headline was "Sexy Geckos Die."
Are you for real? That's crazy. I'm just imagining like the Geico commercial. And it's like a gecko's face.
Gecko insurance over your toe.
So 15% or more on your rocket, even if it explodes. That's okay.
Anyway, back to Laika.
Poor Laika. Laika's also a really pretty name.
It is. Oh. Well, obviously, if they released this information at the time, the like praise that the USSR got for proving that a living organism could tolerate some time in weightlessness, even if it wasn't super long, probably wouldn't be so strong. Like, they probably would have been pretty mad that the poor dog died. Yeah.
Also, if you guys hear like a weird like in the background, my very inconsiderate neighbor is metalworking at the moment, so apologies. But back to the timeline. So to keep things simple, we're mostly going to focus on people going to space so that we can get to the main focus of this episode. Who we haven't name dropped yet, have we?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
No, we haven't.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, in 1961, Yuri Gagarin, was the first person to go into space and orbited Earth aboard USSR's Vostok 1 for 1 hour and 48 minutes. The first pilot-controlled journey was a victory for the U.S. in 1961 when Alan Shepard? Mm-hmm. Why does Shepard look so weird? Anyways, when he went to space on the Freedom 7. He didn't orbit Earth, but he did go up for a 15-minute spaceflight. And then on the 16th of June, 1963, the first woman went to space. So Valentina Tereshkova?
Tereshkova.
Tereshkova.
So cute.
Okay.
So Slavic.
Valentina went on the Vostok 6 for approximately 3 days. Yippee. So now we're done with history, and we can talk about our lovely lady.
Right, now that we're so locked in, you have a better understanding of the early space race. Let's get into Valentina. So Valentina Tereshkova was born in Yaroslav.
Oh my god.
There's a lot of pronunciation in this episode. Well, anyway, she was born in Russia, obviously, in March 6th, 1937. So her father was a tractor driver, and her mother worked in a textile factory. So keep in mind, this is very communism, and this didn't necessarily mean much in terms of status, because everybody kind of didn't have great jobs, and everyone kind of lived the same life, unless you were, like, super rich government bro. But you could join the Red Army, like her father did, and you can get some type of, like, you're more respected because you're doing things for the nation. But so he joins the Red Army, and then he was killed fighting the Nazis during World War II. So her mother was left to raise Valentina and her 2 siblings. So even though he died because he was in the army, this brings a lot of respect for their family. So that's kind of his contribution to their family, which sounds terrible, but that's kind of how it was at the time. So Valentina was not allowed to go to school until she was 8 years old. And then she had to withdraw from school to go to work at the same textile factory that her mom worked in when she was 16 years old. That's just because of communism, I fear. So despite economic hardships, she still found a way to continue her education, though, and this is through correspondence courses.
Correspondence courses in the USSR were a form of higher education designed both for working adults and those in remote areas. They allowed people to study and earn qualifications by sending materials through mail with occasional check-ins at educational institutions. What?
So you would do your written exam at home based on the things that were provided to you, and then you would go bring your exam to your local university and they'd grade it.
So it was a take-home exam?
Yeah, but your entire study was take-home. You would never go to school to bring your exam in.
Okay,
and they would
see.
just send you the stuff through mail. Here's your written.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was analog Canvas.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. So while not much is known about this system, there is a gap in quality between educational standards of correspondence and that of regular universities. And I'm pretty sure the people who participated in part-time schooling were able to receive a small stipend or work credit through it. But regardless, Valentina found a love for parachuting. Where do we jump from schooling to parachuting?
It's kind of her early life was literally school,
parachute,
part, and then parachute.
Okay.
Literally nothing else is known. It was just communism and parachuting.
Gotcha. So she starts parachuting in 1959 without telling her mom. She ends up joining a paramilitary flying club. I like this girl. I can get behind her. She's doing the same stuff that we're doing.
She's so funny.
Except for I'm not jumping out of planes. But I want to.
Exactly.
And so she joins this flying paramilitary club near Yaroslav. Mm-hmm. And trained almost every weekend. She was dedicated.
Yeah, this was her escape. She said, work, school, plane jump.
But my light turned off.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, anyway. So she has more than 90 jumps under her belt. I say has because Miss Valentina is still alive.
Is she still jumping out of planes?
No.
Okay.
No. But I feel like she would if they, like, allowed her to.
That's fair enough.
So she states, I did night jumps too, onto land and onto water, the Volga River. She states that both day jumps and night jumps are very different experiences. In an interview she did with The Guardian, she elaborates by stating that she learned to wait as long as possible before pulling the cord, just to feel air, like 40 seconds, 50 seconds. Here's her counting. It's not really falling. You experience enormous pleasure from the sensation of your whole body. It's marvelous. I feel like she was a thrill seeker.
Yeah, definitely. Adrenaline junkie.
Yeah. By 1961, Valentina had parachuted out of more than 125 aircrafts.
Oh.
In March of 1962, Valentina and 4 other female cosmonauts were selected for the Soviet space program. I'm not sure if this was something that you would apply to or if they would just select you. I couldn't figure it out. But regardless, Valentina was the first cosmonaut recruit who lacked experience as a test pilot.
So Valentina was chosen out of 400 applicants based on her parachuting skills, partially because early Soviet craft had to be exited via a parachute prior to landing. She was also selected based on propaganda values such as her proletarian, aka working class background. I haven't heard the word proletarian since like middle school.
I know, I had to Google it to be honest.
And also her like father was like a war hero, so like that helped her like become propaganda Barbie. But the chosen
That's the name of our episode.
propaganda Barbie.
Space propaganda Barbie.
You guys are hearing us create our episode title in real time. But the chosen group of these are all women, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the chosen group of women spent 5 months in training, practicing weightless flights, isolation tests, centrifuge tests, and 120 parachute jumps and pilot training in a jet aircraft. Only 4 of them passed their final examinations in 1962. Tereshkova was chosen to be launched in Vostok 6 alongside the launch of Vostok 5, which was originally meant to carry another female cosmonaut, but was changed to carry a male by the name of Valery Bykovsky.
Bykovsky.
It's okay, we get to an Indian episode and I'll be doing this to you.
I'm just gonna have you pronounce everything. Okay, so fun fact, her radio call sign was Chaika, which is Russian for seagull.
Okay, so I read this and it made me, have you seen the seagull calling competition? I don't know if it's in like UK or like Ireland or somewhere, but they have a competition where like people come from around the world dressed up as seagulls and they have to like make seagull noises, and it's like a serious competition. But I wrote Chaika. That's the first thing I thought of.
This is horrible, but every time like someone's like, imagine like the sound that this animal makes, it like immediately leaves my mind.
You don't know what a seagull sounds like?
I know, but then I like panic and then all of a sudden I just don't. I can't explain it, but anyway. So this was her call sign.
It somehow feels derogatory.
It kind of does. I don't know why though. I don't know why that was her call sign either, but regardless. So, Vostok 6 launched from the now the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on June 16, 1963. So Valentina was only 26 when she went aboard the Vostok 6 and remained in space for almost 3 days and orbited Earth 48 times.
That's so many times.
That's so many times.
That's
I think I
wild.
looked to the window, I'd just be like... So this gave Valentina more time in space than all of the American Mercury astronauts combined. She spent a lot of time in space.
Yeah.
On June 19th, Vostok 6 entered the atmosphere and Valentina parachuted to the ground. It was like 20,000 feet, like something crazy. She was going down for a hot minute. But she became the first woman in space and the first woman in orbit. But what's crazy is what happened during the flight.
So Soviet chief designer Sergei Korolev was reportedly unhappy with Valentina's performance and claimed that she was on the edge of psychological instability during the flight, which low-key makes like 0 sense, and I'm not entirely sure why he said that, since she literally stated, I felt fine after 24 hours and asked the state commission to prolong my space to 3 days. I carried out the entire schedule. Could I have done that if I had been half dead? So I think think she was okay. She might have been like a little like sick, like PMSing or something, but I think she was okay.
Like went to space. Like I think I'd be dizzy at the anyway. At the very least, like
yeah. But I don't know. Like you go to space and you're like, I don't know. I feel my tummy hurt. I'm just a girl. My tummy hurt.
yeah. And then the men on like downstairs.
You're on the verge of a psychological break. But anyways, she ends up doing everything she was supposed to do on the flight and more. She maintained the flight log and performed various tests to collect data on her body's reaction to spaceflight. Her photographs of Earth and the horizon were used to identify aerosol layers within the atmosphere. Like, could she have done that if she was on the verge of a psychological break? Methinks not. Methinks not.
So there was an article published a whole 30 years later that gives some insight into the mystery surrounding her flight. So there were rumors of like insubordination after liftoff. Valentina had discovered that the settings for re-entry were wildly incorrect, to the point where if she followed them, she would have flown off into outer space and never have like the chance or hope of going to Earth ever again.
I've like seen the things where it's like things are like in orbit and they're like around and around and around and they just go pew and they just go off to space. That's what I'm imagining would have happened to her. Oh, it's me. Sorry. So, she was eventually sent new settings, but the bosses at the Space Center made her swear to secrecy about the mistake to save their own reputation and the reputation of the program. And they kept this secret for 30 years, until the person who made that mistake was long passed away. So, this reminds me of, like a oh my god! And then they messed up with her, and Leica died and overheated. And then they're like, oh yeah, Leica's fine. Leica was not fine. And they refused to let out the information that would make themselves look bad. They just wanted to, like, save their butts.
It's like, I feel like when my parents were like, everything's perfect, everything's fine, it's perfect, it's great. And it's like after like 4 giant horrible things went wrong.
It's like
the kitchen set on fire.
Yeah, like I remember like at the grocery store, my mom's like, everything's fine. And then she'd have the death grip like on my wrist. It's like, I know I'm getting beat when I come home.
Anyway, Valentina and her fellow female cosmonauts were never an integral part of the cosmonaut corps, nor were they treated on an equal basis to the male cosmonauts, as the Soviet government mainly wanted them for propaganda purposes.
Propaganda Barbie.
She was supposed to command an all-female flight aboard a Vostok spacecraft in 1965, but this was cancelled after many issues with the Vostok.
So these are separate missions.
Yeah, so Vostok, it has like a T in it, and this one's pronounced. I'll like put the like spelling on the screen or something.
Vostok and Voskod.
Yeah, Voskod.
I'm sorry, I'm saying it with an aggressively American accent.
Yeah, I think I can't say this, so yippee. The female cosmonaut program in the USSR was disbanded in 1969, and it wasn't until the early 1980s that there was another female cosmonaut group recruited, and they were only recruited as a response to the United States training female astronauts for its space shuttle program. So you can kind of see how this was solely a propaganda move, just one more quote-unquote like success that they could call theirs. Like, an important thing to understand about propaganda in the USSR at the time was that they would fixate on every little success. Like, no matter how minor, it was like a huge thing. Like, oh, but we did so good in this. They would completely ignore failures, even if they were larger than the small successes. Again, they just want to look good. Even if they did something terrible, like being on like the wrong side of the war, they would never admit to it.
Yeah. So Valentina actually received the Order of Lenin and Hero of the Soviet Union awards after her flight. She definitely became a propaganda figure, space propaganda Barbie, after this, and even though this feat gave her security, it defined the rest of her life. Public speaking, accepting honors, traveling the world as a citizen diplomat, she's a very well-known part of what was the Soviet Union and is now Russia, but like she's very important to them. Her entire life after the flight, down to her marriage, has mostly been propaganda. That's crazy, the state being like, you gotta marry this person. So basically, under the pressure of Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev.
Yeah.
Is that Nikita's a woman's name? So she was the leader and she was a woman?
No, he's a man. Nikita is a male name in Russia.
Nikita's a female name in Indian culture.
I think in most other cultures it's not a guy's name.
I see. But after that, homie was like, you gotta do stuff. So the do stuff was actually marrying fellow cosmonaut Andriy Nikolaev. Yeah. So Khrushchev saw an advantage in pairing the two single cosmonauts, and the couple made several goodwill trips abroad, basically to show how great and accomplished and wonderful the Soviets were. They had a daughter and later separated, probably right after the public eye was not so aggressively on them, which like makes sense. And Valentina actually later on, years and years later on, is like, I didn't like Khrushchev, which makes sense. I wouldn't like him either.
She doesn't directly say it though, because she's still again sort of in the public eye.
Yeah.
But she never entered space again, and hers was the last space flight by a female cosmonaut until the 1980s, until Sally Ride in 1983. So technically that's an astronaut, not a cosmonaut, but regardless. Valentina was a member of the Supreme Soviet, the USSR's national parliament, and she also served as a Soviet representative to numerous international women's organizations and events. She was heavily involved in politics until the collapse of the Soviet Union. She retired from the Russian Air Force in 1997 with the rank of Major General. In 2008, she became the deputy chair of the Parliament of Yaroslav Oblast. In 2011, she was elected to the Duma, and as of 2023, she was still serving that body. I don't know how their elections work, so I don't know if she's still serving as that or not.
I see. That's kind of cool though, if she actually got positions and stuff like that.
She's kind of locked in.
Slay girl boss.
Mm-hmm. And then in 2020, she did become a bit of a political controversy when she introduced the idea of removing term limits for President Putin.
I mean, that's still a slay girl boss move.
Yeah, I mean, she's done a lot with her life, and I don't think all of this was just because she's gotten some propaganda.
Yeah. So, she seems to actually admire Putin, and Putin also seems to admire her, which is interesting. But Putin actually wished her a personal happy birthday on both her 70th and 80th birthday. This woman's old.
She's 88 now or something.
Kicking it. Mm-hmm. But we can't necessarily entirely judge her or infer her political standing too much without going into another hour of discussion. At least also the general person in Russia is probably very conflicted between what they have to do externally and what they personally feel. But Valentina herself actually seems to reflect the views of many ordinary Russians, a generation that lived through continuous and often scary changes. They grew up, whether they realized it or not, in a time where there was a price in not conforming. There's sort of stability that's associated with Putin, and the scope of Russian politics, propaganda, and culture is so incredibly complex and speaks volumes about its people and their beliefs.
Yep. My God, I took a class on Russian politics and history and propaganda, and
Did you have to speak in Russian in the class?
No. Oh. Our teacher was she grew up in Russia.
Was it Olga?
Yeah, it was Olga.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out, Miss Olga. But she was super cool. But I think coming out of that class, I was left even not more confused, but there's so much you could talk on and on and on and on. It's a lot. So anyway, moving past that. So something else that Valentina had said in an interview was interesting to me. She speaks on the view of Earth from space and how beautiful and fragile everything becomes in comparison. She believes that rather than fighting ourselves, starting wars, fires, etc., that we should be more concerned about the preservation of our Earth. She states particularly that people shouldn't waste money on wars, but come together to discuss how to defend the world from threats like asteroids coming from outer space. She really doesn't like asteroids. She has talked on and on about picking up a really tiny asteroid piece that fell in Russia and how heavy it was and how dangerous these things were.
Yeah, because teeny tiny pieces they don't have to be that big, but they're coming in at such a speed and intensity that they...
Exactly. So I think that also kind of that statement from her gives some sense to who she is as a person. She cares deeply for our planet and for our Earth, and no matter her background, she's yippee hooray.
Yippee hooray. While Valentina was well known at the time, I don't think many people would be able to recognize her name now. If you're in Russia, she's probably at least someone you've heard of, but outside of Russia, I doubt anybody has heard of her. But regardless, she did a great many things, and a lot of what she did stemmed from the fact that she was viewed as propaganda, and it may have seemed progressive for its time, but was it actually considered progressive? Because, like, she went up to space, and then, 20 years, no females in space, no girly pops in space, no more space Barbies. And then 20 years later, we finally get Sally Ride, so...
Yeah, it would have been progressive and slay and girly pop if she was the first woman to go to space, and there was woman.
Yeah.
Like, more equal since then, but...
And if, like, the men weren't, like...
Oh, you're physically ill.
You're on the brink of psychological breakdown because you're a woman.
And a lot of the articles that we found, because, I mean, you can imagine that they didn't talk about what actually happened to Laika for 30 years. I'm sure there's a lot more that we don't know about her, about, like, what's actually happening behind the scenes or in the history of, like, the USSR that's actually, like, given out as information to the public. So, like, when they, like, briefly mention, the female cosmonauts weren't treated the same as the male cosmonauts, like, there might be a lot more to that.
Yeah, definitely.
So, thanks for tuning in.
The end of Space Barbie propaganda. Bye-bye!
Jaika.
It's beautiful, splendid.